Hi, I'm Shelley Wood, and this is my tiny sewing room where I make doll clothes sewing videos. Today I'm going to show you how to make a Western style shirt with pockets, a front placket, and a collar, as well as sleeve cuffs. And this garment will fit the WWE action figures and similar sized dolls and action figures, but please note this project is not for the beginners. But if you're feeling brave, then before we begin, please go to my website, shelleywood.com, to download this free PDF sewing pattern. There's a helpful link in the description below this video on YouTube directly to the pattern. Use your pattern to cut out 2 sleeves and 2 cuffs. Now please note I am contrasting my cuffs with a diagonal cut, but you don't have to do this. You may want to just cut them to match the sleeve fabric exactly. You'll also need to cut 4 fronts because it's a lined garment and 2 back pieces again for the lining. 2 pockets will be needed, 2 pocket flaps, 2 yokes, 2 front plackets, and 1 collar piece. Now my original pattern actually said that you would be using plaid for this, but I used tan for mine, and I think I've since changed the pattern. But it's up to you. If you don't like tan, maybe try plaid instead. Begin by folding one of the yokes where it comes to a point in the front. Press your fold with a hot iron. Do this with both of your yokes. Pin the yokes to the garment fronts and stitch them in place with contrasting thread, which gives a nice Western look. Do this for both of the fronts. Lay one of the plackets along the front as shown. Stitch it in place, right sides together if it matters. Fold it over and press. Lay one of the non-yoke fronts on top. Now notice it will not align with the other front. You're actually aligning it with the placket, and then stitch the placket to this front lining. Please note I have sewn it to the placket only, not the shirt. So when you open it up, it's going to look like a shirt of its own, which is kind of strange. Press your seams. Do this for both fronts. Notice that there's a yoke on the left here and a yoke on the right here, and that's what you want. Okay, so you'll have 2 different fronts. Fold each shirt front like this. Pull the placket over toward the yoke of the shirt front, and make sure the front and its lining are now perfectly aligned. Press the placket down and stitch it to the front. Now I used a double stitch in contrasting thread. You'll want to sew from the top of the placket to a point that's 1.5 centimeters from the bottom, and then stop right at that top stitching. Stop at the very 1.5 centimeters point. It's important to keep the front and its lining perfectly aligned while you stitch, so I recommend that you use pins for this step. Now this is one of the reasons why this particular project is not advised for beginners out there. There are other reasons, but this is tricky. Do both fronts and then you're ready to start the pockets. Okay, next pick up one of your pockets and fold it. If applicable, keep the right sides together. Stitch along 2 sides of the pocket. I stitch by hand when the piece is very, very tiny like this, but of course you could use a sewing machine. I'm just not that tricky. Clip the corners and invert your pocket. Now I like to use a chopstick to help me invert tiny pieces like this. Just be gentle so you don't poke out all the holes in it or something. You want to just poke out the corners. Insert the raw edges inside the pocket like this. Whip stitch to close this tucked in area. Now attach the female snap right at the center, and I recommend that you use the whip stitched line across. Use your pattern to guide where to attach your pocket, and sew along 3 sides to attach the pocket to one of the fronts. Again, I'm using a contrasting thread for this. Use a straight edge to align your pockets on both fronts before you begin to attach that other pocket. So you want them nicely lined up. Like we did with the yokes, fold the pocket flap along 2 of its 5 sides. Then press these folds. Okay, then finish folding the other 2 sides and press them as well. Do 2 at a time. Trust me on this. I tried the other way. It doesn't work. Now your pocket flap looks like this. Top stitch to hold the folds in place. Here's how my stitches look for the back, because I'm actually using a back stitch for my stitches, and if you need help with back stitching, look in the description below. Use the flap alignment to help you place your flap on the front. This line that I'm pointing at represents your stitch line. Now I recommend that you pin the flap in place and then stitch it to the garment's front. Here's a close-up of the pocket so far. Fold the flap down like this and very gently press the seam to hold the flap down. Try not to press the snap at all. Attach the other snap to the underside of the flap, making sure it is well aligned. Now, if you need help aligning the top and bottom snaps, I have a tutorial on sewing snaps that will help you line them up. Look in the description below this video on YouTube for that tutorial. Now, where the thread shows through on your pocket flap, you can attach a decorative button to kind of hide the thread. Follow these directions for both of your pocket flaps. And if you don't know where to buy teeny tiny buttons, my website actually has a buyer's guide for supplies like this, and I'll leave a link in the description to help you. Now lay one back on top of another, keeping right sides together if you have fabric where it matters. Sew a C shape or a parenthesis shape around the bottom, and then clip this seam and invert it. That's what I'm doing in this next video bit right here. Press your seam, lay one of the fronts on top of the back, right sides together, and stitch across the shoulder. Do this for the other one as well, so both fronts are now attached. Here's the view from the back, so you can see my stitches. Open your garment up like this and press the shoulder seams. Next, we'll work with our sleeves. Lay the cuff against the bottom of the sleeve, aligning the notches. And keeping, now this sounds backwards, but trust me, wrong sides together if it matters. Stitch across the length that has the notch. Flip the seam up from this side and press. Fold the cuff down once and then a second time. Make sure you cover up the seam. You should be looking at the right sides now. Sew along the edge of the cuff. This is considered the right side now. Follow these directions for both sleeves. Open your shirt up like this with right sides up, and lay your sleeve down with the right side down. Sew from the underarm to just shy of the shoulder seam. Wrap the sleeve around the other underarm, just like you see me doing here, and then begin to stitch from the underarm again to just shy of the shoulder seam. Now you want to check to see if they fit together nicely at this point, and finish this stitching the sleeve to the shoulder if it's a nice clean fit. But if it isn't an exact match, which sometimes happens, gather the top of the sleeve to make it fit. This is just a trick I use. Now your garment should look like this. Attach the second sleeve the exact same way, following the same directions. Now your shirt should look like this. Fold one sleeve in half, right sides together, and stitch the sleeve and side seams. Sew from the cuff down the length of the sleeve, and yes, you want to follow that curve, turning at the underarm, but stop sewing the side seam about 2.5 centimeters from the raw edge of the plaid front fabric. Follow these same directions to sew the other sleeve and side seam. Clip both underarms to allow some give. This is especially important for those action figures. Now we need to close off the front pieces. Remember the raw edge that we left at the bottom of the front? We stopped sewing the plackets just shy of the bottom. Tuck the raw edges of the front inside itself, including the front plackets. And use a whip stitch or a ladder stitch if you're good at that. I'm not good at ladder stitch. To close off this part of the shirt. Do this for both of your fronts. Make sure that they align with the back in length while you're working. And you should have two fronts that are finished now. Now you're ready for the side seams, which are still unfinished. Here's a view from the back so you see what I'm talking about. Sew the side seams on both sides. Now your shirt looks like this in the back and like this in the front. Invert the whole shirt. Now we just need to add a collar, which can be tricky. Be patient with yourself. Leave a slight overhang of fabric about 1.5 centimeters from the front placket on both sides of the collar. So you need a little overhang. Now I recommend that you baste stitch the collar to the garment, nice fat baste stitches, so you can make adjustments if needed to the size of the overhanging collar. Once you're comfortable with how the collar fits, you might have to baste stitch it a couple of times. You need to match the lengths of the overhangs on both the left and the right sides. Once you are comfortable that you've got these all matched, properly sew the collar to the shirt's right side. Flip the collar up like this. Fold one overhanging bit of collar in. We're looking at the back side of one placket here. Now fold the collar down once and then a second time. And whip stitch along the edges of the collar, keeping the previous proper and baste stitches well hidden beneath the folds of the collar. Continue stitching all the way around your collar. But when you get toward the other side of the garment, before you get to the very, very end of the collar, fold in the overhanging part once again and stitch it shut. To keep the collar folded down, which is difficult with doll clothes no matter how you look at it, you may need to stitch it to the garment in spots. That's what I did. Add a few snaps down the front placket and a few decorative buttons along the placket. And now your action figure is ready to go herding cows. He looks like a true Western cowboy. For more free printable PDF sewing patterns for dolls and action figures of many shapes and all different sizes, please remember to visit my website, shelleywood.com. Have you ever thought of a brilliant idea for making doll clothes, but you just didn't know enough about how to design your own patterns? I'm Shelley Wood, the doll clothing designer, and I have a real gift for designing doll clothes that I'd like to share with you. In my Creative Spark class, How to Alter Doll Clothes Patterns, I'll introduce you to the basics of doll clothes pattern designs. You will learn how to alter patterns that you already own, how to lengthen and shorten a pants pattern, and how to turn pants into shorts. You'll also learn how to make a skirt more full or less full, and how the fullness of a dress's skirt can affect the fit of a bodice. You'll learn how to design your own waistband for skirts using your doll's measurements. But the real gem of my class is my resizing formula. And trust me, you don't have to be a math whiz to learn how to resize your doll clothes patterns. My formula can be used to make your patterns larger or smaller, depending on what you need. Whether you want to save money on the cost of buying commercial doll clothes patterns, or maybe you're sewing for a doll that you just can't find any patterns for, How to Alter Doll Clothes Patterns will help you design a wardrobe that will fit dolls of any shape or size.